Welcome to Corrective Consciousness, episode 142, the podcast where we explore the inanity of pop culture. I'm your host, vysethebold, and this is...
Lotus Prince.
And OldManStompy.
And, no flubs, no flubs.
Not even one.
Not even in February, or March.
But, Vice, don't you understand? It's April.
I don't. Now it is.
Oh my god.
So anyway,
it will be April real soon.
My apologies to all the people that just unsubscribed, but so we have a really great episode here on the upcoming looming Wrestlemania this year for 2019. So it seems to be one of the most interesting and historic WrestleManias. Is that correct, OldManStompy?
Yeah, actually, I'm really looking forward to this one. There's a number of really exciting storylines going on, and I'll let you guide the discussion to start.
Well, this is really your jam. Everybody knows it. Wrestling is something that I like hearing about, but I like it through distillation. It's kind of like, you wade through a lot of crap in order to tell me,
All right, fine, Vice. I'll guide the discussion. I'm trying to throw you a bone.
But what my point is yes. That you definitely are rolling your eyes at even a lot of the content that you watch, in order to get the best bits out of it.
That is super accurate, and it is very easy to be extremely put off by a lot of what comes out on, at least on American television these days.
Well, not only that, but the dominant force in the thing that you like is also kind of evil. Not even kind of.
Literally extremely evil.
Yeah, so it kind of sucks. It's kind of I like that Disney owns a lot of stuff now, but also I hate it.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of these gigantic corporation kind of things, and but unfortunately this is what you're given. They're really the major game in town by a lot. Mm-hmm. They are doing good things with it, fortunately.
Well, to some extent. I will say that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, they're sort of playing Vince McMahon's real-life evilness into one of the major championship storylines. Actually, a couple of them sort of tangentially, just because he's such a giant piece of shit that you just want to boo the fuck out of him every time you see him on the screen.
And he loves it.
Yeah, and he soaks it in, and they're using it to sell you a product. So it never really makes me feel that good about I'm rooting for a hero, who's facing a villain, and at the end of the day, I'm giving the villain my money,
Yeah, and that's kind of really what makes wrestling what it is. I mean, for a lot, some wrestling is so good because the heels are so good.
Sure.
A lot of times.
Steve Austin never would have been quite as big as he had been if he didn't have Vince McMahon to play off of in his original classic storylines. He was the original badass, doesn't take any shit from his boss. Just wants to walk in and beat the shit out of him for giving him trouble while he's just trying to do his job, and his job happens to be beating the crap out of people.
And he's still a figure to this day because of it.
He's tried to get out of it, but we know that he's always the dominant force backstage, that every decision, even the ones that we like, were signed off at some point by him.
Oh, I meant Stone Cold Steve Austin still does his thing to this day.
Sure, yeah,
because of how famous it was.
He doesn't wrestle anymore, but he was in the Expendables. He's got a podcast. He still plays the persona. It seems to be very much his character.
He's very much still active and visible. Is my point.
And also in the fullness of time, we have realized that he is a domestic abuser, and it kind of feels shitty treating him like a hero too.
It's true. A lot of these guys, have been, revealed to be terrible people. Hulk Hogan is the faces of the faces, and he's a piece of garbage. And I'm not even being hyperbolic. He's just a terrible person, and so is all of his family.
And we knew some of that. We knew he was even if we didn't know any details about his personal life and the way he conducted himself behind the scenes, we knew that he was a backstage politicker, and that he was keeping all these guys down so that he could continue to like be the top guy all the way into his 40s when he should, be winding down in his career to let other people like share some of the spotlight. And he played that into his persona to become a heel like in the late 90s and become like the biggest thing in WCW. And eventually, like, that
he ruined
collapsed.
that brand.
Yeah, that collapsed in its own way too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I was gonna say Rowdy Roddy Piper is one of the great heels that that made a lot of other faces shine at the time he was doing. Though he tends to have a great reputation. Like everybody talks about him favorably, even though he was a heel.
Well, I mean,
it's kind of like Jericho.
He loves his bubblegum. It's just such a
but he's
shame he
all out
can't
of it.
get any. Yeah.
he's all out of it. But I mean, that's like Chris Jericho. Like, he's also a very good heel that apparently is a great guy in person. So that's just one of those things, huh?
Yeah. So it just means that a lot of the time the character, is their personality turned up to 11. But that doesn't mean that morally and ethically they're a good or a bad person. It just means that they have that approach when it comes to like on-screen play fighting.
Showed them, yeah. show business. Mick Foley is very much the same kind of character apparently too.
Yeah.
He's the heelest of the heels. He's evil incarnate. With Mankind and all that kind of stuff.
They tried that, but like it turned out that he was he's such a like a
he's so lovable.
He's such a like a roly-poly lovable, not wrestler-looking kind of guy that he was responsible for one of the biggest face pops in all of wrestling. He was the face who won the title off of The Rock.
He was Cactus Jack, right?
No, he was Mankind at the time. Oh. And he teamed up with DX, D-Generation X, which was Triple H's stable at the time. So Mick Foley was Mankind in his Mankind persona was responsible for one of the biggest babyface pops in wrestling history in the late 90s. This was actually a really famous moment. That was another one of the ones on the fall of WCW. That at the time Raw was pre-taped, and Mankind was scheduled to win the title in a sudden swerve in an impromptu match against The Rock, in which Stone Cold Steve Austin returned and actually like beat up The Rock and Vince and the corporate heels and helped.
This
Mankind.
is when Austin was more popular than The Rock was, right?
This was like the middle of Austin's like absolute top
dominance.
Of the top. But like the Rock was
era.
right there. This was The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. They were the top two guys for the whole Attitude Era. This was after The Rock was already a top guy.
Gotcha.
But this was the heel run that made The Rock. This was originally he was reviled. Like he was a face, but people hated him. They thought he was the original Roman Reigns. They hated his face push. They thought he didn't deserve it. When he turned heel, he got to be as charismatic as he really could be. And that made him beloved again. It's a phrase in wrestling that you have to be hated before you can be loved.
It's just like being. It's like this happens in comic books and other properties too, right? Sometimes the villain's always the coolest character. Like Venom. Venom is really cool, and they had to make him a good guy because he's so cool.
Well, Wolverine was a monster of the week, right? In the Hulk.
Yeah,
he was the bad guy for the Hulk. Yeah, you're right.
And like he's arguably one of the most iconic Marvel characters during their golden age, in the 90s.
Oh, 100%.
Oh yeah, when I was a little kid and the X-Men arcade game was in my local bowling alley, Wolverine was the only I didn't follow X-Men. Wolverine was the only character I'd even heard of. It's like Superman. I don't know anything about comics, but I know who Superman is, like that kind of thing. Wolverine was that for the X-Men for me.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
Yeah, there are plenty of other series and things like that. It happens in anime quite a bit as well. Vegeta, for instance, is so popular that he had to become a good guy eventually.
He came kicking and screaming, and he never really got to be nice until Dragon Ball Super. But he was always popular.
Yeah, but they kind of had he always had knuckle syndrome. You knew he was good at heart, but he always just had a scowl on his face while he was doing it.
He wasn't really good at heart, though. He just didn't like his boss because his boss was even worse. He was an asshole, and he finally realized he was not as much of an asshole as maybe he would like to have been, by the end of Z.
He had a nice character arc in Super, though. I don't know how much you've watched of it, but in the they introduce parallel universes, and there's one where the Saiyan planet still exists, but they're not as strong as the Super Saiyans in our universe just because they haven't been Fire Forged by the Frieza Empire.
Yeah.
So like he has like a nice redemptive character arc. It pulls him out of the shadow of being the number 2 guy to Goku. Like a lot of the time, it feels like characters like Vegeta exist because there has to be somebody for the villain to beat to be credible, a credible threat to Goku.
Yeah.
You know, or whoever the top hero is in your anime of choice.
Well, you could just kill Yamcha. I mean, really.
That's been done.
I always like when growing up. I always like, oh man, Yamcha looks cool. Like, why is he always dead?
Yeah.
So I like that. Like even so, in Super they did a baseball episode, which is the one thing that Yamcha is actually good at, and I love that.
That's
like
true.
the Goku team wins the baseball game by Yamcha like sliding into home plate, and when he slides, he looks exactly like he did when he died.
That's amazing. I still like in
like the Cybermen.
Yes.
Like,
I still like in Dragon Ball Fighters, like the Guilty Gear game, where if you beat Nappa as Yamcha with a super move, then it does like a cinematic finish where Yamcha where Nappa ends up dead, like in the position Yamcha was in, and it's hilarious because Yamcha Nappa shoots like, well, I guess it was a Cyberman that killed Yamcha, but Nappa shoots his beams at Yamcha, and Yamcha sends them back, and Nappa's like, what? And then he ends up in the Yamcha dead position, and it's like the most amazing thing ever.
So like I'm totally okay with this digression because I realized about a year ago that like wrestling and anime, especially Dragon Ball, like shows like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon,
there's tons of comics.
Like the episodic ones are almost exactly like watching weekly wrestling TV.
There's lots
like,
of filler too.
If you watch like yeah, exactly. So like the weekly Raw episodes are exactly like anime filler, where you just the idea is just to establish like this is their signature move, this is their finisher. If they run into somebody who can withstand their finisher, then you've actually got like a season finale style, which usually doesn't happen until the pay-per-views in wrestling, you know. But like so like John Cena specifically has like alternate versions of his finishing move that he pulls out because in his really big matches, you know that his big opponents are going to kick out of his regular finisher.
Sure.
So like he has like level 3 or super finishers that you see evolve over time, and like
that's
it looks
very,
exactly like yeah.
Well, I was gonna say that's very One Piece, because I mean in anime they pull out new moves all the time, but in One Piece it really is like stronger or like altered versions of the same move for Luffy, which is kind of interesting.
So the narrative structure of a wrestling match is kind of the same. But anyway, to kind of wheel back to WrestleMania a little bit, you brought up Roddy Piper, and I appreciate that you did because it's probably the easiest in to the main event of this year's WrestleMania. So Roddy Piper basically knighted Ronda Rousey, the MMA fighter, as his successor. He gave her his jacket that he wore to the ring, and she uses she's been calling herself Rowdy Ronda Rousey in MMA for like a long time. Because she idolized him growing up before she became a professional wrestler. And, it's paid off for the WWF in the sense that she will be the headliner for the first ever women's match to main event and go on last at WrestleMania. And that's an important distinction to make, not just because it's called the main event, but because, there's so many matches at WrestleMania that a lot of the time they call, 2 or 3 of them co-main events, but everybody knows it's the one that goes on last. That's the real main event. And they went out of their way to say well beforehand, I think they actually made the announcement this week, that the women's title match will actually be the last match at WrestleMania this year. The actual main event.
Oh, wow.
First time.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty excited about this. The match.
And not only that, but it's not a gimmick match or anything. It's like an actual match. It's not it's with 2 well-established wrestlers in their own right.
Right. So last year at WrestleMania, you remember I talked about Charlotte Flair, who had a title match against Asuka, and at the time Asuka had been undefeated for about 2 years, and it was really surprising. Asuka had won the Women's Royal Rumble last year, and it felt like this was going to be her coronation as the top face of SmackDown, that she was going to beat Charlotte Flair. And become the dominant women's wrestler on the main roster. But Charlotte won, and the prevailing feeling was that they were going to build up Charlotte Flair as the only person who was really capable of beating Ronda Rousey in a straight fight. They have this problem already with Brock Lesnar, is that that Lesnar is like an athletic freak of nature, that he would dominate MMA, which is real fighting. So how do you explain that somebody could beat him in a fake fight? There's nobody really believes, obviously, that wrestling is real. You know that it's play acting. But when you have a guy whose whole gimmick is he just kind of walks around and does basic MMA moves and basic MMA holds and just dominates the roster, you kind of write yourself in a corner a little bit. It's hard to build somebody up to credibly beat him.
Well, actually, I mean, this would involve... I know wrestling's kind of gone in this direction before, but couldn't it almost... Like, this would have to be weird, but couldn't it be, like, exactly what you just said? Like, they could use the fact that it's fake. Like, they could use some behind-the-scenes stuff, like, and just straight up say, like, we wrote this guy to beat Brock Lesnar with some bullshit, and, like, people could get mad about that and work with, like, the dynamic of what wrestling is.
So that almost never actually works, and, like, here's the reason why. So you're kind of relying on people to be like, everything that you see on the show is fake, except for this piece that you're watching here. This is the part that's real, and you're supposed to pay attention to it. Because, like, people are invested in the storylines because they feel like they feel like they're hoping for some kind of emotional fulfillment, but they're not really sure if they're going to get it. There's always that element of uncertainty. So, like, you follow the narrative structure, and you know roughly who the face is going to be, and you know most of the time the face wins at WrestleMania. So, but they still have to keep that lingering doubt. That's why, I know Vice has talked about this before, people like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan are so effective as faces, because it never really feels like the weight of the authority of the WWF is entirely behind them. So even though they win all the time, there's always that little bit of, like, there's always like a suspension of disbelief when you feel like they won't be written to win because they don't look like archetypal, like, Hulk Hogan types. Like
not only that, but you also get the feeling that WWE is only dealing with them because they have to. So therefore, they will take any advantage to screw them over if it means something good to them.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. So CM Punk, he more or less got his contract because he was the biggest name on independent wrestling. Same thing with Daniel Bryan at the time. He actually got fired once for choking someone out on camera. The executives at Mattel, I guess, didn't like that very much, and so he was so popular they had to bring him back anyway and make him the centerpiece of a couple of storylines after being fired once. That's actually so his real name is Bryan Danielson, and that's why he's now known as Daniel Bryan. It was like a rebranding thing after they had to fire him once and bring it back.
Gotcha. So he's technically a different character, huh?
He's the same character, but, like, as much as people who play, like, so like John Bradshaw Layfield, he plays JBL, who's kind of like a Fox News kind of character, probably really close to his real life persona. But before that, he was just a stooge for the Undertaker. His name was he was just Bradshaw, and they very rarely acknowledge that the Bradshaw character was an actual character. Or, like, that there was any continuity between Bradshaw and JBL. Until all of a sudden, like, JBL, as an announcer, he was an announcer for a few years after he retired from in-ring competition. In a Royal Rumble, like, his music came up, and he just, like, walks out from behind the booth, and he's like, Michael, who's the other announcer, like, hold my coat, and he gets into the ring, just, like, straight from the announcing booth, which is, like, really weird. And Michael Cole he doesn't know what to say. I mean, obviously he knows what to say because it's all scripted, but he's kind of like pretending like he's really confused. And he goes like, "Oh yeah, this is the JBL character's first appearance in the Royal Rumble," which is the first time they ever acknowledged that JBL was like a different person from Bradshaw who had appeared in the Royal Rumble before. So the continuity is basically whatever's convenient for the story they're trying to tell. And in this case, like, they were specifically doing it, I think, because somebody was supposed to sneak behind the ring. Like, interfere in the match. And they do this, they have the announcers enter the Rumble sometimes, because then the audience isn't watching, like, the stage or the ring, they're watching the announcing table. So it's kind of an interesting bit of misdirection. They pull that out a couple times. You know, Jerry the King Lawler is a famous wrestler and also a WWF announcer, and he shows up in the Rumble from time to time when he's announcing. Anyway, so back to the title match. So Charlotte Flair is who everybody thought coming out of WrestleMania 34 would be the big challenger to Ronda Rousey. She, the women's title has only existed in its current form in WWF for, I think, about 4 years. And Charlotte is an 8-time champion, which is another oddball bit of WWF booking. You know, you hear 8-time champion and you're supposed to think like that's a lot of titles. Like the Yankees have 27 World Series, the New York Yankees have 27 baseball world championships. That means they're amazing, right? But like in fighting, you don't want to be the person who has like a lot of title reigns because that meant you keep losing it, right? So like it's the one big break that wrestling has between like the fights, the biggest break I would say between professional wrestling and the fights that they, you know, purport to be pretending to be, you know?
Sure.
Like Bruno Sammartino is the original WWF top guy, and he held the belt twice, one of which was for 8 years. So if you compare his 2 reigns to like John Cena's 16 reigns, sure, he won the title from a person who already held it 8 times less, but he definitely had a much more dominant run at the top. Anyway, it doesn't really matter at this point. Like, that's how they market Charlotte, as an 8-time women's champion. She's the daughter of Ric Flair, who might be the greatest professional wrestler who ever lived in terms of like how much he has accomplished and how prolific he's been during his career. And she's been anointed as his like worthy successor, and she is an athletic, like another freak of nature, like Brock
and she's
Lesnar.
also very much her own person as well.
Oh sure.
On top of that,
yeah, she has. So they've kind of gone back and forth on this, how much they want to sell like her like Ric Flairness and like
she doesn't say. Does she do woo?
Yeah,
I was
she
just about
does.
to say something like that.
So I mean, she does the woo thing. Like obviously, it's Ric Flair's catchphrase from his promos, but it's like a call and response thing where he has a classic like chop to the chest that he does, because he wrestled back in a time when the closed fist was still banned, like it would be in actual conventional like Olympic wrestling. So a lot of guys who were like smaller, like Flair, they would do like chops to the chest, chops, like kicks to the leg, things like that.
Sure.
And so that was his signature move. It would wear the bigger guys down, with like damage to the chest, damage to the ribs and the heart and the lungs. And so when he still did that in WCW and WWF, people would do the woo thing whenever he does the chop to the chest. And in fact, whenever like anybody does the chop to the chest, they do the woo. So like Charlotte does that sometimes, and the crowd like woos along with her, and sometimes they'll play along with it depending upon whether or not she's a heel or a face at the time, because it's generally a face thing to play along with the crowd.
Sure.
But yeah, that's so like she's inherited some of her father's moves, and she does his submission, the figure 4, which is a real submission. It's like a real military submission. She calls it the figure 8 because like she does the 4 and then she bridges up so it looks more painful, even though it really isn't, which is like pretty classic wrestling stuff. Like that's the best kind of wrestling move, is the one that looks like it's really painful but isn't at all.
And then there's plenty of stuff that isn't that doesn't look that painful that really fucking is.
Well, yeah, like so like a lot of this stuff, like even the stuff that looks like it doesn't hurt, or the things that like, so if like someone does a move like a big flippy move and they miss the other guy, then obviously the other guy didn't get hurt. But that fucking hurts, even if you know how to land.
Sure.
To land like flat in your back, even on a springy wressling canvas, like that hurts.
Yeah.
I've even seen it where that canvas was not too springy.
Yeah.
Like it was not constructed correctly or whatever.
Like people have legit, like one of the Von Erichs, I think, a famous wrestling family, one of the kids had to get, I think it was one of someone had to get a foot amputated because they had an injury from landing awkwardly on a trap door in the ring that the Ultimate Warrior was supposed to come out of.
Oh no!
Like talk about another big piece of shit. Like,
well, the Ultimate Warrior's a next level piece of shit because he's just insane. Like he's a piece of shit, and like you can't guess what he's going to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. Ronda Rousey, Charlotte Flair, and the third entrance, Becky Lynch, who's like the most organic baby face they've had in the women's roster in like several years. And so they're all like extremely popular, very recognizable. They're gonna have a great triple threat match. Triple threat rules means no holds barred. I forget what the logic is behind that, but 3-way and anything more than a one-on-one match is always no DQ. Because I guess you can't like rationalize, in a normal match, like ganging up 2 against 1. That always leads to a disqualification if you bring somebody else in to interfere with your match. But in a 3-way match, you can't tell. Like, it's always unfair. It's always 2 against 1. So they play really loose by the rules, and they just made it no DQ by default because they didn't want to have to worry about writing a real wrestling rules book for a triple threat match. Like, it doesn't really make sense in like the world of actual fighting to have a sanctioned fight between 3 people at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So the only issue that they've been having is that Lynch's like organic rise to superstardom happened back in November, and it was obvious at that point that they were considering sort of like pushing her into Charlotte's spot as like the ascendant babyface to take down Ronda Rousey because she was so popular they couldn't avoid it. And they wound up having her win the Royal Rumble in January, and now they've got to fill like 3 months of television where it looks like the match is going to be Ronda Rousey versus Becky Lynch for the women's championship, but they have to keep them apart for like 12 weeks while also filling 12 weeks of television, knowing that the crowd is like dying to see these two get their hands on each other.
That's brutal.
So it feels like they just don't know how to do it. So they wound up inserting Charlotte back into the match. They did a thing where they said Becky was hurt and they put her on a crutch, and then she would come into the arena with a crutch anyway, and then she would pretend to be hurt, and then she would reveal that she wasn't hurt, and she would beat the shit out of them with a crutch. That's a Steve Austin move too. So they're pulling from their old repertoire to get her over, and to find ways to fill television. They gave Charlotte the SmackDown Women's Championship. So there's two brands. There's a men's championship and a women's championship on each of them. So they gave Rousey was already the Raw Women's Championship, and they gave Charlotte the SmackDown Women's Championship. So it feels like it's confused the storyline even further because the match is still for only for the Raw Women's Championship. So it's unclear why they gave Charlotte the other title, because it just means that now there can't be a SmackDown Women's Championship match at WrestleMania, which feels like a big step backwards. Like, you'd think that if you want to celebrate your women's division, you'd want to have as many like matches as you could conceivably fit in the card. But instead, they're putting like everything they have on this women's title match between the two championship holders and their biggest babyface. So like it feels like it was the most natural thing in the world to just have some combination of these three women fight in the main event of WrestleMania, but they're doing just everything in their fucking power to make it as complicated as they possibly can. And
wow.
I'm sure we'll be able to put it all out of our mind after we've watched like 6 hours of wrestling and we're all exhausted, because WrestleMania runs from like 5 p.m. to midnight. So by the time the match actually starts, we're all going to be exhausted. So, hopefully we'll all have like taken a little nap somewhere around one of the Battle Royals. We'll all be ready
how
to
do you
cheer
watch it? Do you watch it at home or do you watch it at like a public place?
I tend to watch it at home.
Okay.
I have never gone to a WrestleMania viewing party. And it is totally not because I am embarrassed to admit that I'm a wrestling fan. But also,
but there are plenty of sports bars and things like that will have it as an attraction piece.
No, it's more because it just runs for 7 hours, and I want to be able to like sit at home comfortably on my couch and just watch WrestleMania for a while.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I know
Makes
that
sense.
feeling.
To like fade out during the parts that I'm sure won't be very interesting. So they structure the card in such a way that usually like before so. Almost every boxing promotion, almost every MMA promotion, almost every wrestling promotion except for WWF builds their cards upwards. The best matches are always at the end, and the dopey undercard matches are always at the start.
Sure.
WWF, they want people to be cheering and invested, so I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but they always like structure their events so that there's a really exciting match at the start to get people who just came in to be excited, and usually like a big one somewhere in the middle, and then a big one at the end. And
peaks and valleys,
there's always like a piss break match, which will not be very exciting.
Well, I mean that does kind of make sense though, because if you go from high to low or low to high, then people will know when to tune in or when to tune out, like completely, as opposed to like for temporarily.
Sure. So like for when you're watching the television shows, the best matches and the best segments are always at the hour turnovers, because you want to pick up people who are flipping over from some other show on another channel that ended. So exactly when you want to pay the most attention to the network television shows. Pay-per-view kind of has the same structure. You already know which matches are going to be pretty good. It's very rare that you're surprised that one of them turns into a squash that ends in 2 minutes. Unless it's like an Undertaker match, most of the time he's going to win in 2 minutes. One, because he's dominant, and two, because he's 54 and he can't really wrestle that long. So if you just want to watch the Undertaker for 2 minutes, you just have to tune in for that little bit of the show, and you can see him, and then you can go back to doing whatever you're doing. So you're right. There's a reason behind it. I don't know if it makes the flow of the show work all that well, but at least it gets you excited for the matches you're supposed to be excited for.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it'll keep you somewhat engaged at least the entire time. Like again. Like being different from the best stuff's at the end, so I'll tune in like after 4 or 5 hours and miss most of the event, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So that's the main event, but there's one other match I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about, and that's the SmackDown men's title match, which is between Daniel Bryan in his new like evil, obnoxious vegan persona, and Kofi Kingston, who is the third member of the New Day, the group of like fun-loving, video game playing black guys.
Yeah,
sure.
Who came out of a cereal box in Saiyan armor.
Yeah, and came in Final Fantasy XIV cosplay.
I love Final Fantasy.
Chocobo and Moogle. Yes.
Oh boy.
I genuinely love stuff like that though, where you know they're reading off a script and you're like, dude, I know better.
Well, I mean, it was funny because
it'd be one thing if they said, "Oh, characters like Chocobo and Moogle," that's obviously funny enough. Like they're not characters, but to follow it up with "I love Final Fantasy," like, oh bullshit, like that's just hysterical to me.
Well, and it was funny because you knew, like, it made it all the funnier because you knew that he was bullshitting, and he was reading the line in such a way to make it clear that he was bullshitting.
Yeah, that's great.
And that just makes it twice as funny to me.
Yeah.
So, usually it's bad when like the announcers break the script. It just makes it feel like they're not taking it seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and you feel bad for the performers, but like this was not about the performers. This was about them doing a scripted ad.
Yeah,
you know, where like the guys on stage were clearly having the most fun because they had worked really hard on their costumes, you know, and the announcers were just there for flavor.
Yeah.
So anyway, Kofi Kingston is a guy who had been kind of a mid-card guy since like 2008. He's been around forever. He's like the definition of a transitional champion, which is usually like a face they put the title on when the heels had the title for too long and they want to bring in a new, fresher heel. Or vice versa, you know, when they want to do the same for a face. So, like, he'll win the title at one pay-per-view and then drop it almost immediately after. He's never had, like, any real long-term success, although he's had, like, 10 or 11 championship runs with various, like, the tag title, the Intercontinental title, the US title. He's never had a real shot at the main championship. So, they're kind of pulling out a story that goes all the way back to WrestleMania, I think, 19, when Triple H had a match with Booker T. So Booker T was a member of a tag team called Harlem Heat. He was one of the last WCW champions before the promotion folded and was purchased by WWF, and he was one of the first really big names to get signed by WWF, to be willing to like cross the picket lines and to be willing to accept whatever money they were going to pay off, because the WWF had the right to pick up all the WCW contracts because they own the IP now, but they didn't want to because a lot of these guys like Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, a lot of the top guys, they had these like gigantic contracts, these like ironclad contracts they had with AOL Time Warner that were impossible to get out of, and nobody wanted to spend that much money for like a 45-year-old Hulk Hogan. So like that's the main reason why most of the major names from WCW didn't come over right away. Booker T was one of the biggest names who did, and he had a match at WrestleMania 19 with Triple H, and the storyline behind it had a lot of subtext with a lot of had a lot of text with a lot of very thinly veiled subtext, such that it was basically text that they were not giving him the championship because he was a black person. So they used a lot of phrasing like "people like you don't usually win WWE championships." Mm. You know, and in the
not
storyline,
only that, but like they would. He basically came out and acknowledged it on stage with a couple of his speeches.
Booker T has said that quite recently. He's still talking about it.
Yeah.
Like so, you know, on the surface they meant WCW guys, and that was still a problem. Vince has always treated guys who jumped ship from WCW like garbage. So at WrestleMania 19, it seemed like Booker T was being booked as the face. And that he was going to beat Triple H, who's sort of a notorious politicker backstage, and like a really good heel, partially for that real-life reasoning. But instead, they had this match where Triple H delivered the pedigree, which is his finishing move, and then just like posed and stalked for like 20 seconds before he finally pinned Booker. It was really humiliating, and it's one of the darkest and worst endings in WrestleMania history. So when Booker talks about how people feel like he should have won the match, it wasn't just that he should have won the match. It was that he was humiliated by Triple H during the match because, you know, because assuredly partially because Vince McMahon is extremely racist. You know, he's an old man from North Carolina. And also because Vince insists on embarrassing guys from WCW. Every time they come over to WWE. I'm surprised any of them ever did after that fact. But after seeing what happened to Booker T. So that was a pretty dark chapter in wrestling history, in case you didn't need additional confirmation that it's run by a bunch of just garbage human beings. But anyway, they're playing off of that a little bit for Kofi Kingston's match, in the sense that so there was a guy in February who was originally supposed to participate in a 6-man match against Daniel Bryan for the championship. His name was Mustafa Ali. He was another big up and comer, another big natural baby face. He's a little guy. He's like a Rey Mysterio type, very athletic, like really flippy. He's a cruiserweight. He was in the cruiserweight division before this, so it was really surprising they brought him up to the main roster. He must be extremely popular with the fans. I didn't know that much about him before this. In real life, I believe he's a Pakistani heritage, and originally on the Indies, he used to play like the traditional like Arab heel. You know, kind of what we think of as a terrorist heel now, as the kind of character he wanted to play. And he, after a while, refused to do it.
Kind of like that Sheik kind of character.
Yeah, like the Iron Sheik. We've been doing, we've had tension in the Middle East as long as the WWF has been a major, player in the wrestling business, and there's always been
basically
an
ever
heel.
since the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot in the early days, he played an Iron Sheik type. And he hated it. He hated like looking at Muslim kids in the ring, looking at him like he had to be a villain, like they had to grow up and be a villain when they were older, and that was their only way they could be a wrestler. So he just refused to do it. He went through the rest of his indie life refusing to be like the stereotypical foreign heel. He was also a police officer, and he resigned because of corruption in his division. So he's got like this real life hero vibe coming up, because like anything, the stuff that he's done in real life is nicer than anything that he'll do in a wrestling ring already,
Sure.
Right. So
he's already proven himself in a significant way, right?
Right. So he came up pretty suddenly. It seemed like he might be groomed as the face to challenge Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania, since Bryan is now a heel, somewhat amazingly. Despite being like one of the most beloved wrestlers in WWF history, he's managed to be that. He's managed to be that.
People
obnoxious.
like him like that, I guess.
No, we love rooting for him like this. Like his character is amazing. He's so fucking obnoxious. Like
no.
Well, so now it's fickle. That's his catchphrase. He also does the no chant. Yes.
That was my favorite, because he for people that don't know, his chant for a long time was yes, and then all of a sudden it was like a very nervous no.
It's amazing.
It was very and on his shirts it was like the yeses were crossed out with a sloppy nose next to it. It was really, that was when I was really watching. That was when CM Punk was really popular. It was the best time in recent memory that I can remember. It was about maybe about 7 years ago at this point.
So for those guys, it's like hard to be an indie darling and also hated. So like CM Punk, at WrestleMania 29 6 years ago, he had a match against The Undertaker. And by the end of the build for that match, he was literally the Undertaker's valet Paul Bearer died that year, right before WrestleMania.
Sure.
And they played that into the storyline. He brought a jar that was supposed to be full of Paul Bearer's ashes.
Oh, I remember you saying that. Yeah.
And Punk just beat him down and then stole the ashes and rubbed it all over his body.
Yeah, that's
and people in the match were still fucking cheering for him. It's what the fuck do you have to do? You literally desecrated a corpse of your opponent's most trusted confidant, and people still fucking cheer for you.
Not only that, but a popular character to begin with.
Paul Bearer was super popular. He had he had this laugh and this oh yeah
that voice
that he did. That they used him all the time in promotional material when he was still an active character.
Best name ever, by the way.
Paul Bearer.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's a pretty good name.
That's obviously a pun. That's
that's so good.
Obviously, you think it's a pun?
Yeah.
You think that there just happened to be a pale skinned chubby guy who named Paul Bearer
who works for the Undead Man? Yes.
They might have made that happen. I don't know.
Mr. Bearer had a kid, and it's just all right. Nice guy.
Can you imagine the ad? Your name has to be Paul Bearer. Your middle name can be whatever. It has to be Paul Bearer. You cannot legally change your name just to satisfy the advertisement.
Everyone
we will
in
not
wrestling
rebrand
is
you.
the real
There is no
name.
negotiation. Anyway,
I've seen weirder.
So Ali, he got hurt right before that big title match, and he wound up getting replaced by Kofi Kingston. And Kingston, sort of quietly behind the scenes, the other two guys in the New Day, Big E Langston and Xavier Woods, they've been pushing for him to get a title run before he gets too old to conceivably have one. Now that he's kind of in the twilight of his career, because he's just done so much, he's so accomplished that he deserves that big moment. in his career at some point, even if it's just like a gold watch kind of title ceremony, where they award it to him just to let him have it, even if he loses the next day. So they've been like super behind him having this opportunity. And in the lead-in to this 6-man match, they had a gauntlet match, which is usually how they like tease you the week before one of these big multi-man matches. The idea behind a gauntlet match is like 2 guys start in the ring, and every time someone loses, another guy comes in until everybody who's in the 6-man match has had a turn, and the last guy standing is the winner. But obviously, like, it's not a real measure for how good someone is, because obviously the guy who comes in last has like a huge advantage, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like a fair match. It's just a showcase for all the guys to have some time in the ring to like warm up. But Kingston, he beat Daniel Bryan, I think AJ Styles. He beat like almost everybody in the match. It was really surprising they gave him so much time. Like, obviously it's scripted. It's not like he like went out of his mind and like beat 4 guys in a row. But he beat almost everybody in the match. He was wrestling for like an hour, and the crowd got like incredibly behind him. It was pretty obvious this was supposed to be like Mustafa Ali's big debut. They were going to give him like 45-50 minutes in the ring to show his stuff. But the crowd really got behind Kofi Kingston because it's like super organic. You know, he's been a beloved face as part of the New Day for like 3 years, and so he winds up losing the. He winds up coming in second in the 6-man match at the pay-per-view after having this big showing in the gauntlet match, and it seems like he's going to become the number 1 contender at WrestleMania. Since he didn't win the Royal Rumble, the men's Royal Rumble was won by Seth Rollins, and he'll face Brock Lesnar for the Raw title. But Vince McMahon comes out and, you know, basically plays himself and says again that like people like Kofi Kingston don't, you know, challenge for the title, and he gave just gave the contendership spot away. And so the storyline coming up has been, you know, Kofi and the other 2 guys in the New Day overcoming basically impossible odds to try to make it to WrestleMania. So 2 weeks ago, he participated in another gauntlet match where he had to start and win against all the same guys he wrestled against the first time around, and he did it. He beat them all. He beat 5 guys in a row. It was like a spectacular showing. The crowd was like out of its fucking mind, you know, when he won the 5th match. And Vince comes right out and says like, okay, actually you've got to face one more guy now, and that last guy is Daniel Bryan, the champion, who comes out. And he's come full circle. So the thing against Daniel Bryan was they always called him a B-plus player. That was his catchphrase, that Vince would always come out and be like, when Daniel Bryan was the up-and-coming face who, like, we felt like the corporate team wasn't really behind him, they kept calling him, like, a solid B-plus. You know, but John Cena, he's an A. Roman Reigns, he's an A. But you're a solid B-plus. Good job. You know. It was, like, really patronizing. So, you know, they keep showing Vince and Daniel Bryan having these conversations like, yeah, Kofi Kingston, solid B+. And it's like really helped cement Daniel Bryan as a solid heel because he's using the same garbage that like was used against him when he was an up-and-coming face. It's like, it's pretty effective actually, I think. But again, it like kind of plays into that thing where you always have in the back of your mind that like even though it looks like the storyline is going to have Kofi win, Vince is Vince, you know, and he's like super racist, and you never know what the fuck he's going to do, right? And you never like. Last year, all the faces, all the challengers lost their big title matches. Asuka lost to Charlotte, Shinsuke Nakamura lost to AJ Styles, and Roman Reigns lost to Brock Lesnar. They are not above just having everybody who you were rooting for lose, just to fuck with you, even at the expense of their own business. So there's real heat behind Kofi to like win this match against Daniel Bryan. It's like probably the second most exciting match. For some people, it's the most exciting match at WrestleMania this year. And to me, the story is really interesting. Those are the 2 really big ones. So, you know, we've talked about I mentioned briefly the men's title match, which is Rollins versus Brock Lesnar. They've played this story like 50 million times with Roman Reigns. He's been fighting Lesnar for like 3 years. So, like, Rollins is basically the same thing. It feels like he only has this spot because Reigns had cancer for most of the end of last year and, you know, couldn't participate. But he's healthy now and he's wrestling again. So he's got a match. Kurt Angle has a retirement match. I thought he retired last year, honestly. He got inducted into the Hall of Fame. His retirement match is against a real nobody. I'm really disappointed in that. People are saying there was a rumor that John Cena is going to return. He hasn't been on WWF television very much for like several months, and he'll like beat up the guy who Kurt Angle is supposed to face, and then he'll take over, and that'll be like a nice farewell match, John Cena versus Kurt Angle. Since that was actually, John Cena debuted against Kurt Angle. That's why people want that to happen. That was his first match in WWF. Was answering a challenge by Kurt Angle from the back. So it would be some nice bookending if they do that. But then there was like a counter rumor by like all the major journal sites that like, yes, actually this is the guy that Kurt Angle is supposed to face for his last match, just because they couldn't spare anybody else in the WrestleMania card. This is the best they could do, which is kind of a shame because he has such a long and storied career, and he's like an actual like Olympic medalist, so he probably deserves better than like wrestling a nobody on the mid card of WrestleMania. But what do I know? I think that's about it. I went over the list of matches, but those are the ones with like real big stories behind it. Oh, Batista's back, so that's got some pop culture crossover appeal. So Batista is best known now as Drax the Destroyer on Guardians of the Galaxy.
I thought he was best known as the bad guy's right hand man in Riddick.
He's also
Inspector, right?
Yeah, he was Inspector, and he was also in the Blade Runner.
Wait, he was Inspector?
Yep.
The Bond movie?
Mm. Yes.
Who was he?
He was basically like the Jaws type character.
Oh, the guy who like only had one line?
He was a gigantic guy on the train.
Oh, that was him?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
His entrance in the movie was fucking crazy, where he just
he's
murders a guy.
Literally the most intimidating presence in that movie.
He was terrifying in that movie. Like, why should you join this council? And he just fucking murders the guy right in front of everybody.
Yeah, no.
That was insane.
They basically kind of made him out to be like a newer kind of Jaws type character.
Yeah, the superpowered, relentless antagonist who's not the final boss, but that's okay. Like, I mean, Jaws also was never the final boss in the Bond movies. He was working for somebody.
Also tore through like walls and shit. Yeah, really cool stuff.
Did you ever see the first Bond movie with Jaws in it, where he like ripped that truck apart, like as Bond was trying to drive away in it?
Yeah,
like that
I
was
have seen that.
Before Jaws became kind of lovable, like a household name. Like the first appearance of Jaws was like, oh my god, like I do not want to fight this guy.
Yeah. Well, if that's your commentary for this week.
Well, no, I'm sorry, we totally interrupted, but OldManStompy was saying that Batista was gonna be back.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no,
please, you can continue.
He came back for a one-time WrestleMania match against Triple H. Triple H is putting his career on the line. That's the stipulation. This like came totally out of left field. So this happened about 4 weeks ago during what was going to be Ric Flair's 70th birthday celebration, and everybody assumed that like, oh, it's Ric Flair. This is going to be like the venue for Becky Lynch to come in and harass Charlotte and Ric Flair some more. She's going to beat up Rick backstage or something. But nope, it was fucking Batista. Just like they showed him dragging a cameraman, which meant that they had to like get a shot from another cameraman who happened to be there just coincidentally.
Yeah,
like really weird. So he was like dragging this like camera guy, with like at like a really awkward angle, like showing him with him like yelling at Triple H, who like was mentored by Ric Flair on screen like somewhere around 2004 2005. So that's the only reason why he was at the birthday party. So, it's interesting to have him back. So, it felt like he had been making overtures to have one last run in WWF for a long time. I think he's like 49 or 50 right now. Let me just check this real quick. But he's definitely, he's 50. So he's definitely at the end of his in-ring career. He looks great for his age, obviously.
Who's 50? Triple H?
Batista, okay. Yeah. Triple H, I think, is like 47 or 48. He's also like pushing 50.
He's getting there. Yeah.
But he's reaching the end of what would normally be, even like a tough guy brawler like him who doesn't do a lot of athletic stuff. He's pretty much nearing the end of his career, so he wants like one last run, culminating in a WrestleMania match. But no, he only showed up like three weeks before. The rumor is just that like these days they don't want any wrestler for the WWF becoming bigger than the brand. And, like, they can't do anything about guys like Hogan, who are, like, still tangentially attached to the brand, for better or for worse. Or, like, Goldberg or whatever, or Brock Lesnar. But they're not bringing anybody back who like, conceivably has, like, a lot of Hollywood experience. They're not bringing The Rock back anymore. It seems like almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot a little bit by not, like, bringing in this almost free mainstream attention.
Yeah.
But they want the brand to be the biggest thing. Like even if it's a stupid decision, it's just like Vince's ego will not allow him to not be the most important person in the room. So it's really surprising to have Batista back. I'm happy they're having a match. It's a little like sketchy because there's no storyline build behind this whatsoever besides the fame of the participants. But they're taking up a slot that will probably take like 10-15 minutes away from that could have gone to literally any other full-time wrestler on the roster. But it should still be fun, I guess. That's about it. Everything else is pretty much filler mid-card that cover or doesn't have anywhere near as much investment as those like main storylines do. So if you guys have any last words, that would be great. Otherwise, I am done until the week after WrestleMania.
Okay. Well, we'll be sure to get your follow-up and input then as well. We're running low on time, unfortunately, so I think we'll pretty much only have time for a question this time around. We'll do the rest of our weeklies and read the
commentaries and stuff like that.
the comments and everything for everybody that contributed next week. We have a lot of them. That's why I want to give them their due time, because there was a lot of participation this week, and I want to make sure that we take our time in talking about it.
All right, so the question is again by General Ledger, and it's the opposite of last time, where last time he had asked what is some kind of interesting sci-fi technology we would like to see in the future for real. This time it is, what sci-fi tech would you have the most qualms about becoming a reality? And we kind of covered a little bit of that last time, like just by coincidence, like the concept of like a teleporter or something like that.
Oh yeah, teleporter is my big thing because I would never want to try it. But let me see here.
You ever see Galaxy Quest? Ask teleporter. You don't want that.
Time travel.
Time travel is fucked. Not to mention that like the plot of every time travel story that I can think of is don't. Like, you made a mistake, now spend the rest of the story undoing it.
Exactly. That absolutely terrifies me.
Steins Gate is fucked, and that wasn't even cosmic universe bending time travel. It was just like a terrible situation that was just so hard to undo.
Keeps getting worse. Yeah, it just keeps getting worse.
It didn't even necessarily keep getting worse. Well, it just kept getting different. And like, nope, you failed again. Like, that's exhausting.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it, so
yeah,
I'm gonna stop you right there.
Yeah.
So I mean, you talked about the two really big ones, teleportation and time travel, that have like a host of like ethical, ontological, and philosophical like complications that make discussion of them in a real world context, like really, really complicated.
Well, probably the big to complete the trinity, it would be like just cloning exact copies of yourself, like not cloning organs. Like, there's another you now. Like, figure that out.
So that's kind of what I wanted to get at. I left that in negative space a little bit on purpose, because there's the third class of sci-fi, which is actually kind of close to being. So the other two, time travel and teleportation, are not remotely close to even being physically possible. Like, they are literally not possible based on our understanding of modern physics.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that we know about physics right now that renders these things possible at all. In fact, modern physics expects and requires these things to be impossible by our understanding. But like things like cloning, or like artificial intelligence.
I have to say something real quick.
Okay.
Didn't they prove just recently that time travel can happen?
Well, yeah, so we're going forward at 1 second per second.
No. I mean actual, in the way that we think of it about it. So apparently they sent a quark, like a fraction of a second back in time.
So there was a paper that purported to rewind time in a quantum computer. That might be what you're referring to. But that would not be considered time travel. So like I can spend like maybe a couple of minutes describing this in I don't want to get too involved in it. But the idea is that the evolution of a quantum computer is something that creates is defined as an increase in entropy. That's usually what we call moving forward in time, is moving in the direction of increased entropy. because like Lotus said, we're always moving forward in time at the speed of regular time, right? So like a car is technically a time machine that only moves exactly forward in time
relative to our space in it, right?
Well, yeah, of course. So think about like dissolving salt in water. So dissolving salt in water means that entropy increases. The crystal structure of the salt is broken down. It's diffused throughout the entire, like, the body of water. You can, quote-unquote, rewind time by rendering the salt back into crystal form by boiling the water in such a way that it leaves the salt crystals as residue on your pan or whatever, right? That's a thing that you can do. It means that it doesn't violate Newton's second law of thermodynamics, which says that entropy always increases, because in the system of the salt, right, that has less entropy than it had before, but you had to add a lot of heat to the system, so you had to create a lot of additional entropy. So what they're kind of saying in this paper is that they discovered a property of quantum computing that is the equivalent in quantum computing of like boiling the water away and restoring the salt crystals. It is something that causes general increase in entropy, but a localized decrease in entropy that restores more order to a quantum computing system. It's exciting because it means that quantum computers become more programmable and more predictable. So we have made some headway in quantum technology. It is not time travel.
I see.
So it would kind of be like me like driving walking down the block and then walking back to my house and saying that I traveled back in time.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, thank you for having me on during this specific week so I could explain.
Yeah, right?
No, you're the only one equipped that I know of. Out of everybody that I actually know, to talk to me about it.
I hope that somebody who listened learned something today, or listened and intentionally didn't learn something but thought it was interesting.
And you had to wade through all of that wrestling goodness.
Who would have guessed?
just the dumbest shit imaginable, professional wrestling, to get to a discussion of quantum computing.
Your man baby soap opera.
There is a lot of baby oil involved in wrestling.
Time to oil up.
That's disgusting. Please, either edit that out of the podcast or make it like a lot louder.
I can do both. We can isolate and turn it up.
Or just send it to me in a text message or turn it into my ringtone. Either will make my life
that
miserable.
can be the only thing that's in the podcast for this week.
it is April Fool's.
I am not participating in April Fool's because unless it's incredibly obvious, I'm very mad at everything that comes out of it.
Right.
It should be like obvious satire time, you know. It should be like the time for Onion articles where know this shit is fake.
I want it to be funny. I don't want it to be like, you know this thing that you really want, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's just painful. It's just like, oh, remember that R-Type thing that you want, and that you haven't had a new entry in forever because your beloved company died. Well, you don't get that. Sorry.
Or just like blatant misinformation.
And they were very elaborate about the plans. Like they came up with concept art and all kinds of shit in order to dupe you. Ugh.
Well, then I hope it isn't the same site all over again the second time around. That's a shame.
The consensus seems to be that some of the stuff was posted on March 31st before the changeover. So people are optimistic that. I mean.
I'm a little bit optimistic, but that's like the first order change, is that like if you're worried that someone won't take your stupid April Fool's joke seriously, you just upload it the day before so that people have some time, so they can like stand alone by itself. Yeah. You know? That happens all the time.
Yep.
But anyway, back to cloning being possible.
So the reason why I wanted to bring this up was because like artificial intelligence and cloning are like ethical things that we can actually do now, and artificial intelligence in particular, like I know I've talked about a couple times on the podcast. You know, it's like we're used to framing the discussion of AI as though like all future AI will be like Isaac Asimov style 3 laws compliant robotics. Yeah. You know, but that's not what AI really is right now. AI is
we don't have laws that they have to follow.
Yeah, they're just human brains that are like programmed with the same assumptions that normal humans have, that learn exactly as humans do, but without the biological
Consequences.
restrictions of having to power your brain with like food and energy. You can just pull the whole, electricity from your neighborhood to power your giant, AI neural network.
They also don't have like ethics built in, like we do be from nature, right?
Right.
Like we naturally don't want to kill each other most of the time.
Well, I don't know if that's an ethical thing so much as if I kill somebody, then what's stopping other people from killing me, or I'll get in trouble. Like, it's not really ethics. That's just raw survival.
Yeah, but it also has a psychological effect on you too.
Maybe. I mean, if there's two people on Earth, I don't think anything would stop one from killing the other. But in a society like that, it gets more complicated.
So there's a famous like thought experiment called Rocco's Basilisk. I don't know if this sounds familiar to you.
No.
The idea is that like we're always operating under the threat of some future AI, because imagine the world is, in some future date, 100 years in the future, under the purview of some omnipotent AI structure, and it decided to punish anybody who didn't help it come into existence. Then like right now, you're operating under the specter that you could be killed in the future by some like powerful AI that you did not help bring into existence.
Also, I always think that what if it just doesn't have the same ethics that you do? Like, it has its own ethics and wants and needs, but it just doesn't care about yours.
I will say that what happens right now is arguably even worse, in that the AIs just have regular stupid human ethics and don't have anything evolved whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like you've heard the story about the Twitter
like racism?
bot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like the Twitter bots that learn from things that people type to them on Twitter just become like 4chan edgelords, because that's all that people feed into them.
Which was a bad idea.
They don't become capable of like actual conversation. They just become edgy teens who can't communicate in a meaningful way with other people. Which is exactly like how teens become edgy teens. It just happens faster.
Yeah.
My favorite is the AI that was only shown Olive Garden commercials through their scripts, and it came up with its own Olive Garden commercial, and it's the funniest shit you'll ever read.
So that's definitely not produced by an AI. It's produced by a predictive keyboard, meaning that like you feed it the corpus of words and you start typing an Olive Garden commercial and you just take like the funniest thing that came after it. Like all
when
of them
you're here,
like that.
you're here is the funniest line.
I mean, they're hilarious, but they're definitely pre-selected. There's a great one that does magic cards, and like the magic cards have a specific grammar that from which it's very easy to fall into the uncanny valley, where it looks like a magic card, but like not
There's
quite.
something
in a
little off,
way.
yeah.
Right. So yeah, I hate to burst your bubble. At least partially. Well, I mean, it's still really funny. Like, it still deserves to exist. It's still art. It's just not entirely produced by some predictive AI.
Sure. Well, I think this is another topic that we could go on forever about. The clone thing, I think Barbara Streisand even has a clone of her dog right now, which is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there are clones of humans running around. We just don't know about them.
Well, I mean, twins are kind of clones, right?
Well,
it's the same principle. Like, clone in
no,
this
but
case...
I you know what I mean. I mean manufactured clones.
Right.
Like deliberately manufactured clones. Like,
so we think of clones as like something that can be grown faster than a normal human like growth cycle. When really right now clones just mean like exactly genetically identical, but otherwise under the same life cycle.
I'm sure FDR's, around somewhere.
Ted Williams is the famous one. Like, he's the guy who like had his head frozen and put into a life extension center.
Disney, that's another one.
Do we know? That was an urban legend, I thought.
Yeah, it is. I think it's been confirmed that he was buried.
Okay.
But I don't know. Anyway, I think we should wrap up. What do you think, guys?
That's a good question. It had a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, we could literally go on about hours, and
but instead we talked for 45 minutes about professional wrestling.
Yep, more important.
Yep.
It's the inanity of pop culture that everybody lives for. So anyway, we'll wrap up the show for this week, we want to thank all of our fans that contributed questions. Please keep us supplied with awesome topics by submitting questions of your own via the YouTube and SoundCloud pages. These have been really great the last few weeks. You guys have really stepped up. General Ledger has some really good questions here too, and has kept us supplied. So please do keep contributing. We will have a larger fan section next week. I promise. We just ran long here because of the topic, but we do appreciate it. While there, please give us thumbs ups, likes, and 5-star ratings on iTunes. It helps promote and spread awareness of the show, and any bit of encouragement helps keep the show going. You can also catch us on Tuesdays on our sister podcast, Reactive Consciousness, the in-depth look at this week in our lives. Finally, you can friend me as vysethebold on Steam, PSN, Xbox Live, Twitter, Switch, and Battle.net.
You can follow me on my YouTube channel, Lotus Prince. You can hit me up on Twitter at Lotus Prince. And finally, if you're interested in seeing my videos early, getting in on exclusive live streams, selecting upcoming games to be the Let's Play, like The Suffering, which just finished, or even get involved in conversations with me and other patrons on Discord, then perhaps consider swinging by my Patreon account, which can be found at patreon.com/LotusPrince.
And you can find me as OldManStompy on most major gaming and social media networks, except for Steam. Next week I'll probably be too busy to take MTG Arena Direct Challenges because I'll be watching Wrestlemania, or perhaps reminiscing about that one time in WWF that Donald Trump wrestled Rosie O'Donnell. It wasn't even actually them. It was just actors playing them.
Still, I wouldn't put it past them because... yeah, that kind of shit happens. All right. Well, we'll catch you next week, everybody.
Until next time, everyone.
Cheers.